Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the session, Technology and the Future of Humanity, with Shara Evans. Shara Evans is a futurist and keynote speaker, helping leaders navigate their way through the latest technologies and advising how they can harness these in the business today to make money, save money, and solve problems. Shara is highly regarded in the media and is sought after as a commentator on a regular basis, offering insights into what's happening with the latest technologies and trends. Shara has appeared on shows such as Sky News, Lateline, and 7:30. Finally, Shara is about to film a major documentary series called Life 20 for the U.S. Fox Network. Would everybody extend their warm welcome to Shara Evans? Thank you.
Thank you, Jean, and good morning, everyone. It is such a thrill to be presenting at SWE. I've been a technologist for my entire career, and it is so unusual to be speaking to a room full of women, especially women engineers. You rock it, ladies. And to all the men in the room, thank you for being here and supporting your female colleagues. That is so important to do as well. Today, we're going to go on a ride into the future. And I'm going to be touching on a lot of different technologies, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun this morning, and I hope you agree. I'd like to start with a concept that many of you have probably heard of, smart cities. Raise your hand if you've heard of smart cities. Raise your hand if you haven't heard of smart cities is probably the question. Okay, so you all know about it, but let me give you a couple of examples of what I consider to be a really smart city. One comes from Italy, where Trenitalia is outfitting their trains with sensors so that they're able to get real-time diagnostic information about the status of all kinds of things on their trains. And rather than doing maintenance on a schedule, they're now doing maintenance when the sensors indicate that something is wrong. And as a result, they're saving about 8 to 9% per annum on maintenance costs. And they spend over 1.3 billion euros per year on maintenance. So that is very significant in terms of return on investment. Another example, also from trains, comes from my hometown of Sydney, where they've deployed a sensor on trains called Mousetrap. And what Mousetrap does is it sniffs out the smell of spray paint or permanent markers. And as soon as it sniffs the smell, it triggers a CCTV camera feed that goes into the train's office and police, and they can see what's going on. If someone is defacing a train, guess who's waiting to meet them at the next train stop? But if someone's just coming home from a hardware store, no problem, they're not hassled. That's part of smart cities and where we're going. Here in the US, there's a couple of interesting projects that are happening in Chicago, and I was out there a little while ago. One of them is called the Array of Things, and their goal is to have about 500 of these beehive-like clusters sitting in different neighborhoods, mainly on street poles, so that they're being able to collect information on a micro-neighborhood basis, things like ambient temperature, pedestrian traffic, all kinds of chemicals and pollutants in the air, vehicle reverberations, noise, you name it, they're able to collect it from these sensors. And they're actually fairly small, but I've seen them in person, and they're starting to be deployed throughout the city. What's interesting is that they're making the data open source so that not only can city planners use this information to help them with logistics and deciding where to put things, but app developers can do things like, say, design an app that lets you walk from home to work in an area that has the least number of pollutants in real time. So if you have an asthma condition, you can navigate around areas that might trigger your asthma, but also have other pedestrians around you so that you're safe, because there are some neighborhoods in Chicago, like many parts of the world, that just aren't as safe to walk in as others. But Chicago, for as much as I admire this particular project, they've got another project where they've open sourced data for ride sharing, and they're making it available to download in a spreadsheet. And me being me, I downloaded the spreadsheet, and it took a while to download, even with a really fast internet connection. And the first thing that I saw was that they had very precise GPS coordinates. So what I did was I literally copy-pasted a couple of rows of GPS coordinates into Google Maps, and the first thing I saw was somebody's home address and a picture of their house. I went to another row, did the same thing, saw somebody else's house, picked another row, found a shopping center. If I were using sophisticated GIS tools, I could have figured out people's pattern of life. And if I were a criminal, I'd be able to figure out when the best time to rob a particular place is. So the moral of this story is that if you're collecting data, you need to be really cognizant about what you're putting open source and the granularity of the data, because I can see where having that kind of information is useful, but I don't think it actually needs to be as granular as pointing to a specific house as opposed to a block or a neighborhood. Another example of smart cities uses technologies like augmented and virtual reality. And frankly, in the industrial world, these are really interesting technologies. This picture is from Spain, from Acciona Agua. They're a water treatment plant, and they're using both technologies there. With virtual reality, they're using it for training purposes so that engineers can learn to play around with all kinds of things in the water treatment plant without any chance whatsoever of something going wrong in the real world, and they can have multiple people collaborate at the same time. Virtual reality is a fantastic training tool, and it allows you to gain that real-world experience that you wouldn't want to do in, say, a live water treatment plant. But on the live side, what they're doing is equipping engineers with augmented reality glasses that superimpose real-time information from their SCADA system in their line of sight. So as they're looking out over this field of pipes, they can see what's in a particular pipe, what pressure it's at, how hot or cold it is, which way to turn a nozzle, and it has video conferencing capabilities. And if they need to talk to a particular expert about something that's out of the ordinary, they can do it in real time. But from a security standpoint, as you're doing these things, what you want to also consider is that you want to make sure that this information is encrypted, because if someone were to hack into it and tell you to turn a nozzle the wrong way, that could result in a catastrophe. So with any technology, there's always great opportunities to leverage it for benefit, but things that can go wrong. Augmented reality also has some fantastic uses in the healthcare space. There's a company that was a spin-out out of Oxbridge, and it's called Oxite, and I've been tracking them since about 2015 when they were still in the early experimental stage. They're now commercial. And it was started by a neuroscientist who wanted to help people who had eye diseases where they were legally blind. So things like macular degeneration or retinitis pigmentosa or glaucoma or other diseases, and use augmented reality to basically refine the background of what they're seeing in a way so that they could actually navigate around in the real world without needing a seeing eye dog or a companion. And in fact, their commercial now, you can buy their glasses, and the picture on the bottom right is actually a lady who's legally blind but is now able to read sheet music. How amazing is that? That is life-changing. When we talk about smart cities, we can't get away from driverless vehicles. I took this picture a couple of years ago at the Consumer Electronics Show, and I have to say, this is one of the most beautiful vehicles I have ever seen. It's a concept car from Toyota. No matter what angle you look at it from, it is just simply gorgeous. It has AI, and all of the auto manufacturers are investing very, very heavily in AI as well as robotics. It has autonomous mode, as you would expect, but it also allows you to drive it in manual mode if you want to. But it's smart enough to pick up the fact that if you're driving in manual mode and you're starting to fall asleep, it'll take over for you. Now, mind you, it's a concept car still. And it has a whole range of other features. What's interesting about this, and most of the other vehicles that I've been looking at, is that they are electric or hybrid electric vehicles. And that's going to require massive infrastructure changes because we're going to need very fast charging EV stations all across the world because these cars can hold a charge, many of them for, say, 5 or 6 hours or maybe more, but you're going to need to charge up, and you're not going to be wanting to sit at a gas station for 4 to 8 hours while it charges. That just doesn't make sense. You want to be able to fill it up as fast as you would with a regular car. So that's one of the things that we're going to need to see. Another thing that we're going to see as a result of driverless vehicles is what I'm calling a vehicle-to-vehicle network up in the sky. So these cars, each individually, are loaded with lots of different sensors, and of course they talk to GPS satellites. But what will start to happen over the coming 10 years is that we're going to see them talking to each other through a new kinds of comms network, and it may be 5G, it may be some other communications technology. But not only that, all of the traffic infrastructure is going to be outfitted with sensors. So a red light or a traffic light will be fitted with sensors, and it will be broadcasting out to the car, I'm red, and I'll be red for another 10 seconds. Speed limit signs will be broadcasting out the speed limit. Stop signs will be saying, I'm a stop sign and you're 10 feet away from me. Say goodbye to traffic infringement revenue in about 10 years' time. Goodbye, but lots of new jobs of the future. Let me show you what this might look like. This is from Black Sheep Productions.
Mr. Summer, bring me a dream. Taking a student that I've ever seen. You'll have nobody to call my own. Please turn on your magic beam. Mr. Summer, bring me a dream.
Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think I'd be too game to be walking in front of a car going that fast. Not for the foreseeable future, but funnily enough, engineers are actually working on something called slot-based engineering that would allow cars to be able to weave in and out like that. What they haven't figured out is what to do about us pesky pedestrians that they can't predict our movements. And I think we're still a way before cars are smart enough to figure out every kind of move that us crazy people might do or animals might do. Another major area that is going to change our cities are drones of all kinds of capabilities. Right now, most of the drones that you see are manually controlled, but they're moving into autonomous flying robots. So let me see hands. How many of you own a drone? Oh, a lot of you. I'm talking to engineers, of course. How many of you have a drone that's an autonomous drone? Oh, a couple early adopters. You work for tech firms? No. Okay, good on you. Right now, drones are already being used for a lot of different things. They're used for aerial inspection of all kinds of assets. They're used for real estate, videography. They're being used very heavily in the insurance industry to be able to assess damage from things like wildfires or floods and help people get their insurance coverage a lot faster. What's really exciting are two new areas, drone delivery and flying taxis. And these involve, generally speaking, autonomous vehicles, especially in the delivery segment, although in trials there are still a lot of humans in the loop. The picture on the bottom right is me about 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, with one of the world's first working autonomous prototypes from a Chinese company called eHang, and it looks like a helicopter. It fits one person, and you get in and you use an app and you tell it where you want to take you to, and it can fly it up to 100 kilometers an hour. And they're already doing real-world trials in the Middle East, in Dubai, with this particular autonomous vehicle. But there is getting to be a little bit of a dichotomy in what's happening in the flying taxi area. Another company that's making a big investment in flying taxis is Uber, and you probably know them most for their ride-sharing taxi platform. Uber's pretty clever about what they're doing because they took that platform and they leveraged it from ride-sharing into food delivery and into package delivery and now into the world of flying taxis. And they're starting to do tests next year in 3 cities, one in Melbourne, Australia, another here in LA, and then the third in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And in Melbourne, what they're doing is on skyscrapers, they're putting at the top what they call skyports, basically helipads. And these flying vehicles are electric, and they're about 90% more efficient than a traditional helicopter in terms of energy use. And just over the last, say, 4 or 5 months, Uber and a couple of others have moved from being 100% autonomous to actually having a pilot plus passengers. And that's what they're doing, certainly in Melbourne. I don't know 100% for sure if that's their plan for LA and for Dallas, but I suspect it's the same. So they'll have a pilot and 2 passengers. There's another company called Volocopter that's also doing trials in the Middle East, and they're starting to move also towards allowing you to have either a pilot or go in completely autonomous mode. And they've been doing trials down there. Yesterday, when I was at the exhibition, I was talking to people from Cora, which is a subsidiary of Kitty Hawk, and they're still going down the 100% autonomous path. So I'm starting to see this dichotomy between completely autonomous or starting off with a pilot. No matter which way we go, what I expect to see are highways in the sky. In other words, just like we'll have vehicle-to-vehicle networks on the ground for driverless cars, we're going to see airspace segmentation for these flying vehicles, and vehicles that are autonomous or have a pilot or have extremely sophisticated sensors will be flying at higher altitudes, whereas manually controlled drones that are line of sight will be going at lower altitudes, and there'll be no fly zones. And I expect that there'll be a similar vehicle-to-vehicle type of network for these drone highways in the sky as well. Another new transport mechanism that I think is super exciting are hyperloops. Is anyone here involved with a hyperloop? No. Have you all heard of hyperloops? Raise your hand. Oh yeah, again, engineering crowd, I sort of expected you would. But just in case anyone hasn't, what you're doing with a Hyperloop is you're taking a tube and you're sucking the air out of it so that it's at near vacuum. And because of that, you're not meeting air resistance. And that means you can hurdle pods of either people or cargo much faster than you can on a typical train track. And they're electric vehicles, and they will be autonomous after trials finish. And there are a number of commercial companies that are getting into this. This is a test track in the Nevada desert from Virgin Hyperloop One. Another company that's making big investment is HTT, Hyperloop Transport Technologies. Both of them are actually starting to build Hyperloops in Dubai, going from Dubai to Abu Dhabi, and looking to be commercial most likely next year as part of a big Dubai exhibition. And if successful, they will be traveling at an average cruising speed of about 430 miles per hour and a top speed of close to 800 miles per hour. The ride between Abu Dhabi and Dubai is about an hour and a half, depending on traffic, but it will be down to 12 minutes. In Australia, there are proposals to put Hyperloops along the East Coast and literally take drives that might be a few hours between cities down to about 10 minutes. This is the kind of technology that can be a real game changer for regional areas and bring jobs to places where jobs wouldn't be and allow people to live out in areas where they might not want to live without that kind of infrastructure. So I'm finding it very exciting, and I'm seeing Hyperloop trials starting in many parts of the world. And then there's outer space. And this, like Star Trek says, truly is the final frontier. And it's happening in our lifetime. How exciting is that? The reason that it's happening is because the private sector has been investing very heavily in reusable rockets. Think about it. If you had to take a flight between here and Dallas and you only got to use that plane one time, it would cost you a small fortune, and only a very few amount of people would be able to get on it. Whereas today, we take jets everywhere, and the cost can be pretty cheap, down to, a few $100s, or in some cases, maybe $99 or less if you happen to get a bargain. We're starting to see all kinds of private industries, along with space industries and space agencies, making major investments in this. One of the big players is Elon Musk's company, SpaceX. Hyperloop is his idea as well. Sorry about that. And he has a reusable rocket that has been tested many times already. And he has plans to do an uncrewed mission up to Mars. I think it's 2022, a fly around the moon in 2023, and then going on from there. Eventually, we will start to see colonies on other planets. And I think that's actually really important for the future of humanity. And there will be so many new jobs that come out of this exploration of space, and a lot of offshoots and innovations that come out of this as well. If I had to pick just one technology that is going to be the technology that impacts every single person and company on the planet, it would be artificial intelligence. And when I talk about AI, I'm using it as an umbrella term. It means a lot of different things. It encompasses machine learning and deep learning, image recognition, facial recognition, natural language processing, voice recognition, emotion detection, whether through the expression on your face, the tone of your voice, the cadence of your words, the particular words that you use. It includes things like chatbots and gesture awareness, smart robots, driverless cars, and a whole lot more. AI is being used very effectively already in a lot of different vertical industries for sales and marketing. If you think about marketing in general, the top 1% of your customers are actually 18 times more valuable than any other customer. So what's really important in the sales and marketing world is getting your message to someone at the right time, right place, on the right device. So I've chosen an image here of a young, very well-dressed man who happens to be in a shopping mall, and he's got his mobile phone with him, and he gets an advertisement, and it happens to be for a brand of shirt that he likes, and it's sold in a store just a few feet from where he is, and it's at a price point that he's willing to pay for, and they happen to have his size. What do you think the likelihood of that man walking into that store and maybe buying that shirt is? Probably pretty good, because it's right time, right place. Another example, completely different industry, of how AI is being used is Royal Bank of Scotland. And what they're using AI to determine is when people consistently are having overdrafts. And what that triggers is a financial planner to call that person to see what's going on and how they can help them and see what's happening with their finances. In other words, it's triggering a human interaction. Another example from the airline industry is with Air Canada, where they're looking at the ways that people navigate their website either on computers or mobile devices, and using that information and the analytics behind it to enhance user experience by changing the way that their website works. Another industry is the hotel industry, where the Dorchester line of hotels, which owns multiple brands, has thousands of customer reviews that they get every single month. And for the executive team, it's impossible to read thousands and thousands of customer reviews. So what they are doing is they have the AI digest these reviews and summarize them into a 30-minute video for the executive team. This is just the tip of the iceberg. We're also seeing chatbots of many different types roll out across many industries. This is an example called Babylon that is being rolled out in the UK with the support of the National Health System. And Babylon has a voice interface, and it's literally helping to do first-level medical-grade triage of people when they're not feeling well. And the reason the NHS is interested in this is that the waiting times are growing, the budget's not getting all that much bigger, the population's growing and getting older, and it's putting pressure on the health system. And frankly, if you have to wait 2 weeks to see a doctor and you're not feeling so well, the outcomes for you as an individual are not very good. It's much better to get some sort of assessment as fast as you possibly can. So what this particular chatbot does is that it uses a database of all kinds of medical interactions for deep learning, and then in natural language, it asks people a series of questions like a GP might ask a person, and it just drills down, and then it errs on the side of caution. If it thinks you need human intervention, it will say, go to a hospital emergency room, go see your GP, or maybe you just need to go to the pharmacy to get some aspirin or get something to wrap a sprain. And it's not always 100% accurate, but I think it's actually better than waiting a couple of weeks to see a doctor if you've got a medical condition. If you're not sure, my advice would be always go to see the doctor or go to the hospital room. But there have been some issues when they rolled it out in another country. They rolled it out in Rwanda, and in the first release, before they did some further training on their deep learning, they hadn't taken into account some of the local epidemiology for malaria, and they just weren't asking the right questions about that. They very quickly learned that that was an important medical question to ask in that particular country, and they modified it. And that's one of the lessons here with chatbots and deep learning, is that even if you've got a great medical database to begin with, you still need humans in the loop to continually train the AIs that are sitting behind this to help them learn about the latest things and the things that are localized. Where we're going in the future is that voice is really going to be a major interface on almost everything that you can think of. Kids today are going to grow up expecting to be able to talk to gadgets. Just like today they expect to be able to touch stuff and have it react, they'll expect to be able to talk to stuff. Researchers at the Imperial Business School in London predict that in about 2 to 3 years, with our home automation devices like Alexa or Google Home, it will be listening to the conversations that we have and actually interjecting into personal relationships advice about how we might better communicate with our partner. So can you imagine you're sitting at home having a conversation with your spouse, and Alexa pipes up to your spouse, you know, you really shouldn't talk to her that way. You're going to get through to Alice a lot better if you phrase it like this, or vice versa. And in about 6 years' time, not only will it be analyzing conversations in the home and possibly the office, it will be looking at your genetic profile and information from your wearables about your physiology and be able to predict potential chemistry between you and a potential mate based on the kinds of conversations you have within listening distance of these devices and your physiological responses. So say goodbye to dating websites. You'll have these guys figure it out for you. One of the new jobs of the future is going to be a chatbot conversation engineer. People who literally help design the kinds of conversations that chatbots will have with people. So even though they're learning on big databases, there's always fine-tuning, and there are always new things, new products, new developments that happen in the market, new things that happen in society and in politics. And this is going to be an important new job of the future. Another aspect of AI is facial recognition. And we're starting to see systems roll out that are very, very fast and can recognize people at an angle. But what's interesting is that it's also able to pick up the emotions of people by the expressions on their face. So looking at these images of this young man, is there anyone here that could make out every single one of his emotions? I can't, and I've never had an audience with any single person raising their hand. You know, we humans, we're really good at a lot of things, but some of these emotions, it's kind of hard to figure out exactly what this person is thinking. Imagine if you had augmented reality glasses that were giving you these other subtle clues about whoever you're talking to, what they might be thinking in response to what you're saying. That could be really handy in a lot of personal situations as well as business situations. But the question is, are we going too far, too fast with all of this facial recognition technology? We have CCTV cameras that are rolling out all over the place. We see them in airports, you know, for our passports. You know, that's pretty safe because you're looking at a government issue document, your passport, so it's a pretty good chance that it's really you. But what if somebody actually hacks into databases and swaps your picture for a criminal? Or what if you're falsely identified as a criminal? And unfortunately, that has happened. The ACLU here in America has done a number of studies. One that comes to my mind is a study where they took pictures of members of Congress and then matched it against a criminal database, and it picked out 28 lawmakers as criminals. Now, there might be some of you who say all politicians are crooks. But that's a lot different than being an actual real convicted criminal. There are a lot of false positives, and in fact, the bigger the database gets, the more false positives you get. And there was a case in London where the AI actually confused a young lady with long hair with an aging man who was bald, and I don't know how it made that mistake, but it managed to do that. We also have some of the scary things of social surveillance that are happening, and I get particularly concerned about that and about privacy aspects. And, you know, when you start having things like social credit based on the expression on your face when you hear a political announcement, that starts to get me a little bit worried about, hey, you know, that might have been a fleeting thought that I've had about something, and suddenly I'm dinged and not allowed to travel because I've had a fleeting thought, or I buy too much alcohol, but maybe I'm buying it for a party. You know, where is it going to go? And how might this be used by a non-friendly government somewhere in the future? So as we start rolling these technologies out, I think we need to think about some of the longer-term ramifications of how these technologies can not only be used for benefit, but how they might be abused, and put in steps so that they don't get abused. And I have to say that it's very easy to trick an AI. All I have to do is jiggle less than 1% of pixels in an image, and I can turn a school bus into an ostrich or a cute little doggy or a pyramid. If I look at the distorted picture with my human eyes, it still looks like a school bus or an ostrich or whatever it is, but to the AI, it looks like something completely different. And it's one of the reasons that I think that we should not be using AI-enabled lethal autonomous weapons without humans in the loop, because it would be really easy for a hacker to take a picture, jiggle some things around, make an AI think that a passenger jet is an incoming nuclear missile, and boom, there goes World War III, whereas a human looking at that picture will say, no, that's a passenger jet, not an ICBM, and not hit the red button. So with technology, again, always this yin and yang of great uses, but possible areas where it can go terribly, terribly wrong. One place where it can go terribly wrong is with this new technology called Deepfakes, which is a portmanteau of deep learning and fake news. So how many of you have heard of deepfakes? A lot of you. Again, I'm talking to engineers. I sort of expect it. You might have seen or heard about this. So in this big picture, we have Alec Baldwin playing President Donald Trump on Saturday Night Live, and he's made up very well, and he's a really great actor in, you know, he really did a fantastic job. But somebody named Deepfakes literally took an AI program and skinned this performance with the real image of Donald Trump and uploaded it to YouTube, and it looked and sounded exactly like the real President of the United States. So fast forward 2 or 3 years, and here's what I think could very well happen. It has not happened yet. Imagine that in your business, you regularly use video conferencing to talk with your colleagues, and many of you probably do already. What if someone were to hack into that video feed? So let's say you're talking about a merger and acquisition, and you know that your colleague has just come from an overseas trip and they've been on a flight for 16 hours, and they ring you on the video conferencing system. You see them, it looks like the person you talk to every single day. The background in their office is the office that you're used to seeing them in. There's nothing to clue you that there's anything wrong. It sounds exactly like them. There's no lip sync distortion or anything else. It's really, really good. And they say to you, okay, I've been overseas. Can you please update me on the latest on blah, blah, blah M&A deal that we're working on? And you tell them because you're expecting that phone call. So there's a bit of social engineering. But it's actually a hack, and it's a deep fake, and it's live, and it's over your system, and it's the first time in the world it's ever happened. So I'm going to give you 4 choices that I want you to vote on. So don't vote yet. So the first choice, and it's going to be who's responsible. Is it the person who's made the disclosure? Is it the company that owns the video conferencing system and runs it and services it, or has designed it? Is it the cyber criminal or somebody else? So let's have a vote for who has disclosed the information. And let's say it's a publicly listed company, so it's insider trading. How many of you would vote for the person who's disclosed the information? A couple of hands. How many of you would vote for the video conferencing company? More hands. I'd say maybe a quarter of the audience. How many of you would vote for the hacker? Looks like about 3/4 of the room. How many of you would vote for somebody else? A couple. I've asked this question at legal and regulatory conferences, and do you know what? The vast majority of people vote for the person who's accidentally been tricked. To me, that's wrong. I think our laws need to be updated to take into account the fact that these technologies are coming on, and if someone is tricked in a way that they have never heard of before, and it's never been done before, and they had absolutely no intent of leaking insider information, in my opinion, I don't think that they're the person that ought to be going to jail. It ought to be the perpetrator, somebody involved in the crime or somebody who didn't put in the proper security measures, not somebody who's been tricked in a way that they just could not possibly discern or know about. Robots. Wow, we're going to see them everywhere. In construction, there's a robot here in America called SAM for semi-autonomous mason. When I first started looking at it, back in about 2014, 2015, it was laying about 1,000 bricks per day. Last year, it was doing 3,000 bricks per day. By comparison, a human mason, top mason, might do 600-700 bricks per day. So this is a combination of human and robot working together. Humans still load the robot. In Australia, we have a bot called Hadrian X that's completely autonomous, and it's able to do 1,000 bricks per hour. It's super fast. We're going to see a lot of robots in warehouses. In fact, I was reading some stats recently that Amazon has about 200,000 robots in its warehouses, but it's also hiring more people too. In China, for a number of years now, they've had a restaurant that's had robot waiters. You walk in, you get greeted by a robot. Back in the kitchen, they've got a couple of robots that are doing some stir frying. They have other robots that are doing some dumplings. And then they've got robots that bring you out your food. And the impetus for this restaurant owner to do it was his teenage daughter, who's like, Dad, I don't want to do this housework type of stuff. Why don't you just invent a robot and do it? Well, he didn't invent the robot. He bought robots and put them into his restaurant. And then we have other robots in retail, and this one comes from San Jose from Orchard Hardware, and it's called Oshbot. And if you walk in and you need a widget, like let's say I need one of these, I can say I need one of these, and it'll 3D scan it, and on its faceplate, it'll give me choices of what looks like the gadget that it scanned, and I'll say, that's the one, and it'll just walk me over to wherever that particular gadget happens to be, and on its faceplate on the back, it's got a digital ad, and it will be advertising to people and serving multiple purposes. One of the things that I've been predicting for a while is something that I'm calling robot as a service. So right now we have software as a service, and we have a lot of things as a service. Well, we're starting to see it roll out in the robotics world too. This is an exoskeleton from a company called Sarcos Robotics, and it's called Guardian Max XO. It's rolling out at the end of this year, beginning of next year, and it's being offered on it as a service basis. This robot has built-in sensors that are able to figure out when the wearer is about to lift a muscle, and it's for occupational safety and hazard. And what happens is that it takes the load off of the person and onto the exoskeleton. So if I were to be in this skeleton and lift up 100 pounds, it would feel like 5 pounds, and it's capable of lifting up to 200 pounds. There are a lot of different industries that this would be applicable to, anything from construction to warehousing to medical to you name it. Something like this could be extremely useful. In Australia, we have completely autonomous ports in Sydney and Melbourne from a company called Patrick. And they started working with the Australian Centre for Field Robotics based out of Uni of Sydney, oh gosh, probably 20 years ago now, and started to roll it out in Brisbane first, where they've got 35 of these autostrad or autostraddle robots. They weigh 60 plus tons each and can pick up close to 60 tons of containers. These are giant robots. Altogether, they weigh about 120 tons. In Sydney, they've automated that as well, and they've got about 50 of the autostrads. Since they've invested in this, Patrick has grown from a $100 million company to $1 billion plus company. And not only that, but it's been said that about 20% of their valuation is based on automation. And what's interesting is that they have no humans in the area where the autostrads are operating, so they invented all kinds of navigational techniques to be able to let these huge robots work completely autonomously. We're also starting to see robots doing repairs on cities, and that's actually part of the future of smart cities. These pictures are from the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and it's the result of a project that's been, at this stage, about 10 years in the making between University of Technology Sydney and the New South Wales Roads and Maritime Authority. Now, the Sydney Harbour Bridge, you've probably seen pictures of it, even if you haven't been to Australia. It's one of the most massive and intricate steel infrastructure projects anywhere in the world. And of course, it's an icon of Australia. But like any steel infrastructure, it needs regular grit blasting, and there are a lot of nooks and crannies where it's just simply impossible for a human to get into. And not only that, but grit blasting is pretty dangerous for humans to do. So the bridge engineers and the roboticists at UTS got together and started to think about ways that they can solve this problem. And the scientists looked out to the insect world for inspiration and chose an inchworm. It's something in robotics that's called biomimicry. So this robot actually has a name. It's called Croc, and it's actually live on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. We've got Sandy and Rosie working every single day, and they've been working on the bridge for about 8 years now. They are 100% autonomous. They are able to completely map out the infrastructure on their own. The cable that they have leading out of them takes the real-time, high-definition camera feed back to the bridge engineers who can assess what they're seeing and decide whether a particular area needs grit blasting, and then, of course, the robot can go off and do it. In the UK, at the University of Leeds, they're working on a project in conjunction with the council and the federal government where they want to design fleets of tiny little robots that will have self-repairing cities by the year 2050. And they've been working on this for a number of years now, and I've had the pleasure of speaking to some of the scientists involved in the project. One of the modes of working is something that they're calling perch and repair, where literally drones will be able to go on top of buildings or light posts and do things like change lights out. Another mode is called perceive and patch, and their idea is that we should never have to tear up a road for construction. We should be able to get at potholes when they're tiny little things in the making. When I was talking to the scientists a few years back about how they would do it, my initial thoughts were, well, you probably will need to have drones flying above the roads, looking for potholes in the making and then go out and fix them, maybe with 3D printing robots. And they said, well, that's one idea, but ideally what we would like to do is partner with the driverless car industry, because all of these driverless cars are going to have cameras and sensors, and we can get real-time information from these cars that are driving around on our roads and use that as our signal for when to send out robots. But in the meantime, they're actually doing real live experiments. So what they're doing is they've actually designed 3 drones that have the ability to, first of all, fly along the road, see where a pothole is in the making, then another drone that goes out, lands, and starts to do the pre-digging work, and then a third one that's mounted with a 3D printer and actually does the patching. And they've got a bridge bot that's an experimental robot, which is the big picture that's able to do something similar on bridges. But one of their more ambitious projects is to actually have robots go underground, deep beneath the city, where literally they can live and fix things that no human could possibly even get to. One of the challenges, of course, will be communication, so they'll probably need to be putting in place comms nodes as they go along, as well as power nodes to be able to continue to get power. So how smart can AI get? Well, if you ask researchers, you'll get different answers. I think the sky is the limit. So the question is, when will AI reach what we would call general human level intelligence? So today's AIs, although they're getting smarter and smarter, they're very narrow in their focus, whereas a general AI will be like us humans and able to multitask and do different things. At a conference a couple of years ago, the question was asked, when do you think AIs will get to a general intelligence level? And half of the researchers thought it could happen between 2040 and 2050. But if you fast forward out to the year 2075, then 90% of the researchers thought that that would be achievable. However, there have, just in the last few months, been announcements that have come out of Google's AI and robotics lab that are showing that quantum computing is advancing much faster than anyone thought. And there's something that they're calling Nevin's law, after one of the researchers, that says that quantum computing is advancing at a double exponential rate. So rather than getting double the speed every 18 months, it's starting to happen every 9 months. At the beginning of this year, they had quantum computers that they were able to emulate what the QCs were doing with laptop computers. A few months later, the laptop computers were not able to do that, and they had to use banks of supercomputers to be able to emulate it. And they think by the end of this year, they may not even be able to do that. If quantum computing continues to develop along the lines of the predicted Nevin's law, we could see general AI machine intelligence much faster than many people think. And I don't know yet how QC is going to prove out, because it's just too early in the experiments, but it is something that's very much a possibility. So what does that mean in terms of jobs, and especially automation? Well, of course, there's going to be lots and lots of jobs in the STEM area, but when will you decide to use a robot or an AI instead of a human? Well, one of the factors is it technically feasible to do this? The second is, how much is it going to cost to do it? Another factor is the scarcity of labor or particular skills. Another factor is the cost of labor. And Another one, which is interesting, is productivity. So it's not just about doing things faster than a human might do it, it's about doing things in a way that a human can't do it. So here I'm thinking of agriculture. If I have a robot and it has all kinds of sensors and I have it going down an agricultural orchard and it's able to measure the nutrients in the soil, the level of moisture in the soil, whether there's fungus on plants, how many buds are on the plants, and a whole range of other things, that particular robot is discerning information that a human just cannot discern. And that means that there's additional productivity benefits from deploying that robot other than just replacing a human. Another aspect of this is the regulatory environment. So if I think about driverless cars, if a particular country or state or community outlawed driverless cars, you wouldn't see them, but in 10 years' time, they'd have a really hard time for their citizens trying to buy a car, because they probably wouldn't be able to buy a car that doesn't at least have autonomous mode. But on the other hand, if they mandated that certain highway lanes were only for autonomous vehicles, you'd see a much faster uptake. And then there's also the social acceptance side of things. And a lot of science fiction talks about social acceptance or non-acceptance of robots. And it's really fascinating to see what's starting to happen already. So in Sweden, in the mining industry, like many other places in the world, they're starting to roll out robots. And they did a survey last year, and workers there were not concerned, and unions were not concerned, like 80% of the people they surveyed. And the reason that they weren't worried about automation was, first of all, they figured there's always going to be something that humans have to do, and people will have to maintain robots. But most importantly, they have a very strong social welfare network. So it's your safety net. And they pay for your education, they pay for your health care. Here in the US, a survey was done by Pew Research a few years ago, and it turns out that 73% of US citizens are very concerned about robots, because if they lose a job, they lose their medical benefits, and if you're older, you may not be able to find another job, so you get a completely different reaction. Some of the things that I've been hearing recently out of the UK show that some of the social acceptance issues are already starting to raise their head. There have been examples where people in stores where robots have been rolled out have been deliberately sabotaging the robot so that it doesn't perform well, putting things in the way to make it trip up. And there have also been a couple of reported incidents of robot bashing. I haven't really heard of too much in the way of robot bashing in the US, other than one incident in Philly a couple of years ago with something called Hitchbot. So what kinds of jobs might we have in the future? Well, the answer is lots. Definitely an AI trainer. So if I think about deep learning, one of the things that is absolutely necessary as we build these big neural networks is having reinforcement learning and humans in the loop that actually help to the AI to determine when it is behaving correctly and help people to understand whether the outputs are congruent with the inputs. And it's really hard because these data sets that come in are massive data sets that you can't possibly read. And the neural networks are really obtuse, and you need to be able to figure out whether the outputs are congruent with your company or government's mission and values, and it's a constant learning process, and that's a huge job of the future. Another thing that we're going to see are empathy trainers, and that is literally teaching bots, whether they be AI or physical robots, how to better interact with humans. So I'm calling them empathy trainers, but people with degrees in political science, philosophy, behavioral sciences, psychology, some of the softer skills, poets, they're going to have a lot of jobs working in conjunction with technologists to help train these systems to better interact with humans. Another trend that I'm starting to see is something called imitation learning. There's a company called Kindred AI that has designed this particular robot. And the way that this robot learns is that humans in a virtual reality environment literally are showing the robot how to pick up different things in a warehouse. So there's a way that you pick up something that's like a soft piece of fabric as opposed to a delicate piece of glass, as opposed to a bulky project. And in fact, at the trade show yesterday, I was talking to a gentleman from a company, ABB, I think it was, where he had a robot where you can program it manually, you can program it in virtual reality, or you could program it literally by taking its arm and moving it and showing it how to do something. So the latter two are what I would call imitation learning, and we're going to see that in a lot of different robots across a lot of different industries. We're going to see human resources transform. It might still be called HR, but I think it will be the head of human and robot orchestration. Where do we use people? Where do we use software bots? And where do we use physical robots? And how do we get them to orchestrate and work together as a team? And at the same time, how do we change our business to be super agile and being able to change our business case fast rather than in 6 to 12 months? Another important job of the future will be a chief ethics officer, the other CEO. And there are so many ethical considerations, whether it's jobs, whether it's decisions that a driverless car will make. For instance, if you've got a driverless car and you've got an unavoidable accident, how do you decide who gets hurt? Is it the passenger in the car or passengers, or is it the pedestrian? Is one person more valuable than another? So if you had a car that, say, had the President of the United States or the leader of whatever country you're in, would that car behave differently than another car? Will cars from one manufacturer behave differently than another? Who's going to make these ethical decisions? And also, this is just the tip of the iceberg, really big conversation, but what about unintended consequences? Let's say you told an AI that I'd like you to help me eliminate a disease, let's say breast cancer, and it turns out that that particular disease is primarily female oriented in terms of people who catch the disease, and the AI says, the best way of eliminating it is just eliminating women. Well, let's hope it's not armed with lethal autonomous weapons. That wouldn't be good, even if you're a guy, that still would not be good for the human race. So we need to really think about a lot of these things. I think the human touch is going to continue to be important for the foreseeable future, especially in things that involve personal services. And it's another really important aspect. But let's go into the future for a moment. Are we going to take tech into our bodies? I think it'll start with self-contacts or smart contacts. And here we're talking about everything that you have on your smartphone, plus being able to blink and take pictures or videos. And Sony, Google, and Samsung all have patents to be able to do this. Plus augmented reality, plus biotech. Imagine if you were wearing these, and by the time they come to market, they'll be translucent, most likely made out of graphene. And not only do you get, all the features that you have on your smartphone, plus augmented reality, but autofocus. I'll be able to see the person's name tag sitting all the way out the back. Or it might be able to detect a medical condition like my insulin levels through lacroglobin in my tear ducts. We'll see stores coming out, where you download apps that are a combination of biotech and tech and ICT. But every year I look at it, it's 5 to 7 years, and it just keeps moving out all the way from 2014. By the way, these pictures are from Google. The big one is from 2014, and the smaller one is from 2016. You can see how they're getting more and more transparent. I think it keeps moving out because of the biotech side. It's not really the ICT side. It's the comfort and the ability to do all these medical functions that's delaying it. But I think probably in the 10-year period, we're likely to see these. Then there are brain-machine interfaces. Will we merge our physical brains with machine brains, whether they be through chips or maybe DNA-printed nanobots? And What kind of superpowers might we have? Can you imagine thinking a question and getting the answer downloaded into your brain? Or trying to solve a complex problem and getting the equivalent of a supercomputer helping you out? Or you want to send an email to someone and all you have to do is think it. Oops, don't think too fast. But what if the chip auto-completes? Have you ever sent a text that has really goofy stuff in it because your smartphone has changed the words and you don't realize it? What if something stupid comes out of your mouth that you haven't figured out? Or how is this chip going to decide between what is an intended action and what's just a random thought? So let's say you're in traffic and someone cuts you off and you have this thought, oh, somebody ought to teach him or her a lesson and just ram them. You don't actually intend to do it, but what if the chip in your head decides, oh, let's do it? Who's going to be responsible? You or the chip? Or what if you say something stupid that was just floating through your mind, but you never were going to say it to a person? Lots of ethical issues, but companies are working on this. It's going to happen first in the medical area, and already a lot of work is being done with brain-machine interfaces. Elon Musk has a company called Neuralink that has come out just in June with chips that are 4 millimeters by 4 millimeters, and they have 10,000 electrodes on them, and they're planning to implant them in humans who suffer from paralysis due to an accident by the end of next year to help them regain some of their body motions. That would be fantastic. But we have to think about what could happen and what could go wrong if we have these things in our heads, especially if they're owned by employers. But we will see human implant specialists, people who help out with this kind of situation. Another really interesting area is stem cells and regenerative medicine. This guy, Chris Numa, is a neurosurgeon, and he's been experimenting with putting stem cells that are harvested from the love handles, the extra fat that you have, spun out in a centrifuge, and helping people with Alzheimer's by drilling a hole into their head and injecting them with stem cells. His first patient is an 82-year-old man named Jack Sage, and Jack paid $10,000 per injection for 8 injections, and his memory was decreasing rapidly. And what happened is that his cognitive score went from the 5th percentile up to the 48th percentile. So the first stage of this trial was very much a safety and efficacy part of a treatment. And stem cells, frankly, are very hit or miss for these kinds of applications. But it's one of the kinds of new, interesting areas. Another area where we're seeing stem cells is in therapy for eye diseases. And it turns out that there's something called the retinal pigment epithelium, or RPE, that sits behind the eye, and it's one of the cells that helps maintain your vision, and it's impacted by age-related macular degeneration, and they're using stem cells to be able to coax them to grow into RPE. But it turns out that the key there is something called a cilia-type projection, and if the cilia doesn't grow in the right angle, then it actually destroys your vision rather than helps as a transplant. But where I see stem cells being really interesting is in this whole area of being able to be used to use your own DNA and your own material to bioprint replacement organs or help you fix up medical conditions. And of course, there will be all kinds of new jobs. Regenerative medical technology specialists are going to be huge. Nanobots are fascinating. These are teeny, teeny, tiny robots. This is not a real picture, it's just a graphic illustration. But the China Institute for Nanosciences in Arizona State University have designed an experimental nanobot for cancer treatment where it uses this thin roll of DNA, and it's coated with a protein that binds only to cancer cells. So it gets injected into your body, and when it detects this particular cancer protein, it binds to it, and it literally starves it of blood. So it's very targeted precision medicine that can treat a particular cancer without poisoning the rest of your body. We're also going to see a whole new field of nanomedics, because once you get these things in your body, how do you get them out and how do you program them and how do you control them? And this is an exciting new field. Genetic engineering is another super exciting field, and it's going to lead to a whole new era of precision medicine. We've already mapped about 3 billion base pairs through the Human Genome Project, but we haven't figured out what they all do. It's estimated that by 2025, we'll have mapped out the functions of anywhere between 100 million and 2 billion of these base pairs, and then we'll really start to see very customized precision medical treatments that people are able to take advantage of. But then the flip side, and there's always this flip side of genetic engineering, is ethics. In China, in April, they released a research paper where it turns out that researchers were injecting a human brain development gene called MCPH1 into the embryos of macaque monkeys. And at first I thought, oh gosh, this must be an April Fool's joke, it can't be real. But I actually did the research and found the real research paper, and then went back and found pre-experiments going all the way to 2010 and found it written up in the, I think, MIT review, like a lot of really credible sources. And it turns out that by injecting these monkey brains, there were 11 monkeys, embryos, that they injected it into. 6 of them died, but 5 of them lived. Of the 5 who lived, they had slightly longer brain development periods than a normal macaque monkey, and they were just a little bit smarter. And they're now looking at using another gene, FOXP1, I think it is, and which is the language development capabilities, and injecting those into monkeys too. Has anyone seen Planet of the Apes, any of the movies? That didn't end so well, so some of these things I'm not so sure, we really want to do. But the very last job of the future, one of the very last things I'll talk to you about is genetic 3D designers. I think that this will be a new job of the future, changing our own genetics, making us look younger, giving us new appendages, especially if we go into outer space. But last but not least, what if we identify the gene that impacts aging? Already at the Salk Institute, they have identified genes in mice and in humans where they're able to start turning back the clock, at least in petri dishes, and in the case of a live mouse with progeria. What if we could start turning back the clock, keep our wisdom, but make our bodies look and feel younger? There's another professor, a geneticist and physicist, who believes that the aging gene, we'll find it within the next 10 to 20 years. And when we do, we will live 5 to 10 times longer. Can you imagine living to 400 or 800 years old? Can you imagine working for 400 years? Can you imagine being married for 800 years? What in the world will that do to population growth? Well, I hope you've enjoyed this ride for the future. We have time for questions, and I'm going to hang out afterwards if we run out of time and you still have questions. So thank you. So do we have any questions? Okay, I think I see one up here.
We're going to start over. What do you see in the future for implantable medical devices and sensors?
I'm sorry, for?
Implantable medical devices and sensors?
Oh, they're definitely getting smaller. In fact, I was actually talking to one of the ladies who presented at Medtronics yesterday. After her presentation, I said, "Are you looking at making your devices smaller?" And she shook her head. Oh, yeah. In experiments, I'm already seeing things like tiny origami robots that literally you swallow as a pill, and they just go through your digestive system. They're coated with ice, and they're guided by magnets by a surgeon, and they're used to pry button batteries that have become lodged in your stomach or esophagus. And literally, instead of operating on you, you just open it up because your digestive juices have melted it, and it pries it off of wherever it's become lodged and injects an anti-inflammatory drug, and everything comes out whoosh through your system. Eventually, we're going to see these things go down to millimeter and then nanometer size, and that's just one example. Super exciting. There's a question here. Can we get the mic? Over here.
Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Thoroughly enjoyed it. Could you clarify the pixel comment about AI? You said that it was it only 1% of the, can you give me the
all
math
you
on
need
that
to
again?
do is jiggle less than 1% of the pixels, and it's been proven experimentally that that's enough to fool an AI classification system. And it has to do with the underlying linear mathematics of how AI classification is done. It's not anything that's specific to AI, it's specific to that class of mathematics.
Hi there, I'm back here.
Okay, I see
Thanks,
you now.
thanks for the great presentation.
Thank you.
Can you speak at all on how we're going to, in the public policy space, maybe move beyond individual governments and become a more global? Because very different conflicting ethical opinions by cultures.
You know, in some ways, I think we're almost getting there by default with corporations that are multinationals becoming so powerful. In a lot of cases, the earnings of corporations are bigger than the GDP of a lot of countries. But where I think it's really going to happen is when we start going into outer space and we start to see corporations making major investment in exoplanetary exploration and establishing colonies. And once that happens, then I think the governments on Earth are going to have to either decide collectively we act with a couple of voices or one voice or a few voices, or the corporations will actually end up being in charge as we start moving further and further out into the solar system and beyond. Now, that might be 30, 40, 50 years into the future, but I think it could happen.